right, John, welcome to All Things Armwrestling.
Glad to be here.
And how about you give us a little sign-on call?
All Things Armwrestling.
All right. So I got some questions for you that are going to be unique to you. Just like I want to have everyone's perspective of arm wrestling because everybody comes to the table and experiences it differently, even though really it's just like this one thing that like it's like we all have questions, right? And it seems obvious, but to me it's like arm wrestling is always like unlocking some kind of things that weren't obvious where you thought it was obvious before. So my first question, because you've had some experience, how do you envision the future of arm wrestling? Do you have like, have you ever thought about it?
Yeah, I guess. I kind of got into it a couple of years ago, maybe even further back as a spectator. And even in those few years, it's evolved a lot. Mm-hmm. I've met people at the gym that have heard of arm wrestling and Devin Larrett for the most part, but have watched an arm wrestling video, not just people breaking their arms being dumb at a party.
Oh, right.
But actual pro arm wrestling matches. So I think the speed at which things are evolving is increasing. And I think as we move forward and there is more accessibility to things like ArmBet to watch professional matches, I think more and more people are going to be hearing about it and are going to want to seek it out, especially if they're the types of people that are either really into strength sports or really into weird sports.
Oh, I never really thought of it that way. But yeah it does kind of get into the weird section, right?
Well, you've never met someone who's like into grip training who's like completely normal, right?
That's a really good point because I never really made that connection, but as soon as you say it that way, I'm like, oh yeah, you're absolutely
just
right.
Just an example.
You're right
grip
about
training
that.
is one of them. Yeah.
I'll give you. This is how I look at it, and since you said grip training, I've looked at these people who are like super into grip training with like a grain of salt, where I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. I didn't know that was a thing. And then you see how they're into it, but they're also into like regular stuff, but they also do grip training. Like regular stuff, I mean, like they deadlift a lot and all this bullshit, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that's normal, but they also love their grip training. But yeah, I could see that that's actually like, when I first saw grip training, I was like, when the fuck did this start? Like, is that a thing since when? Like pinching these little cubes and stuff like that, right?
I mean, it's a big element in like strongman and stuff like that, having a strong grip.
Being able to carry that weird shit, right?
Yeah, but it's usually not like pinch grip or, those weird, like when you're, I think pinch grip is one of the weirder ones, but there's all sorts of things, right? But it's funny because, for strongman, you usually have to be a big guy. Right. But for regular grip training, you get some lanky guys. They just have this phenomenal hand and forearm and ability to hold on to things. So grip training makes that type of strength more accessible in some ways. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be 6'7" and 300 pounds.
No, you don't.
To enjoy some of the lifts like, farmer handles and all of that. Or like a Millennium dumbbell type lift, or those like that square handle that you lift stuff with. I actually had some friends in high school that were into that.
How did they find it that young? Like, where do you?
I think part of it was martial arts. A lot of them had some martial arts experience,
right.
And they kind of heard the importance of grip strength in martial arts, either from like a very thing where you're like you're holding onto a gi,
right,
BJJ or something like that, or just how tight you can clench your fist. I don't know the truth of that. I imagine grip strength is important in general, but it's just another element that they thought it was cool.
Now the thing about grip strength is the one guy that's been coming here to our practices who hasn't been here in a while that's really into grip strength. He actually is the perfect case for the guy that should practice grip strength. So I don't know if you ever met him. His name is Jacob.
No, I never met him.
So Jacob, if he ever comes through anytime soon and you're around, he's a little bit shorter and his bone length of his arms, he's got shorter arms because he's like just a proportionally smaller guy. But he's strong as fuck, right? And his hands are small too. So he's proportionally correct, but compared to a bigger guy, his bones are short, his hands are small.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect arm wrestler that needs a horrendously strong grip because he'll fucking wrench you down in a top roll or whatever the hell. And that's exactly what he does. Yeah. He's like fetishistic about the grip training. And when you get on the table with him, he just fucking rips you down and you're just like, okay, that works for you. You keep doing it. It's awesome, right? So that's interesting to me. But my grip sucks.
Me too.
And have you trained grip to the point where you're like, oh, let me see if I can get it to not suck?
Not at all. I hate training grip. So I do powerlifting type training. And I've done like general strength training. I'm not like a competitive powerlifter or anything like that. But I've always hated grip training. I've never really done it consistently. I've luckily never had any issues holding on to a deadlift. Mostly because I just go to mixed grip and use chalk, and it's hard for the bar to slip out of your hands.
So, like, but not to cut you off, but right before you get to your max deadlift, right? Are you doing double overhand grip and then you go to mixed grip?
No.
You stay in mixed grip?
Stay mixed grip, Okay. I could double overhand at some point. I can't anymore, actually, but I could double overhand like close to 400 at some point, but for a lot of people, that's like not a lot at all. Then I really have to switch to mixed. But I even tried hook grip for a while, and hook grip is just plain painful.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me.
It does not work at all for me.
I think it's because my hand size is just a little bit too small.
Yeah.
So I try to get around that bar, and it's like my hand needs to be bigger.
My thumb is about to explode.
Yeah.
But I've always found, and so I've never really had to grip train for my deadlifting, which is why I never really did it. But anytime I've tried like grip exercises outside of a a squeezer, I've just hated the feeling. It just hurts. It doesn't feel good. You know what I mean? Like you lift anything else, maybe you get a pump or like you feel accomplishment or something, but you hold on to something heavy and your whole body is just screaming at you, let it go. Why are you holding on to that? You clearly cannot do it.
So I think the difference is the guys that love the grip, they just don't have that feeling. They're like, yes, get it, squeeze it harder.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But I feel like most grip training stuff is designed for people with bigger hands anyway. You know what I mean? Like if you ever tried to squeeze plates together or hold a thick plate or something like that, every guy that likes it has a hand that's like twice as long as mine. And they're like, oh, it's not so bad. I'm like, yeah, because you can get
for you,
all of your fingers around it. Like I got my fingers. It's like for us trying to palm a basketball, it's not fun.
Exactly.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I've never really liked it. But now I am starting to involve a little bit more finger training in what I do. I wouldn't call it, grip training necessarily. But just finger training where the stuff is more pulling into my fingers.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So I hate grip training. Not that I'm not going to say hate. It's a crazy word because I don't want to offend the guys that love it, but I do hate it.
Yeah.
And so I don't do it.
Yeah.
So you feel the same way. Isn't it interesting that just from training arm wrestling, your grip is going to get better? So it's like, just train arm wrestling and see how it goes because... Why fuck with your grip? Just try to get better at arm wrestling and then see where the weakness is.
I'm down for that.
Yeah.
However, I will say that now I grab stuff differently. Now that I've got arm wrestling on the brain.
So what are you doing?
So for example, when I do my dumbbell rows, I want to cup the dumbbell while I row. And I have the strength to do it, but it makes the row feel weird. Whereas before, I would never even think like my hand would just bend back because when you grip something hard, it'll naturally bend back a little bit, right? But now when I feel it bending back, I'm like, no, cup it in, and then like my row feels weird.
Yeah.
So now I just grab stuff weird. I'm not at the phase where I'm like fully immersed into arm wrestling yet, where like I do everything that way.
Right.
But I'm still like 1 foot in, 1 foot out in terms of what my brain thinks it's doing.
Well, that's
I just
funny
grab stuff weird. Yeah.
Because I do the same thing. So as soon as I realized almost a year ago that when I'm training for whatever the fuck for health, when I'm doing my gym stuff, that I should be doing it for arm wrestling, but I wasn't doing arm wrestling specific training yet. Mm-hmm. I was doing stuff like that immediately. So like if I'm going to do barbell rows, I'm going to do them with some flexion. Yeah. And which is funny because I've been training all my life to deliberately never do that. So like when I would teach friends that don't really know how to lift and they want me to like just show them the ropes for a few weeks, I would watch them, and let's say they are construction workers and they're, for some reason they love flexion and they're always doing flexion. Yeah. A lot of times I'd see these guys, they'd be rowing, and as they're trying to get the row up, they start going like this, and I'd have to yell at them and go, "No, look what you're doing with your wrists. Keep it straight." And they would struggle to keep it straight. Yeah. Now I'm trying to do everything wrong so that I can arm wrestle. Right. Those guys that were doing it naturally wrong are probably going to be really good at arm wrestling. And I'm yelling at them to undo it. Yeah. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, to some degree, it's a natural thing. When you cup your wrist in, it makes the lever a little bit shorter for your bicep, right? So
when you're doing curls, you want to finish them, you want to do this, right?
Exactly. Now, I tell my clients not to do that.
Right. Because you're not supposed to, but in arm wrestling.
They're not arm wrestlers, right? Yeah. But I'm like, no, we're trying to develop your biceps here. Like, try to leave your hand out of it a little bit more.
Like the crazy thing where you could do the bicep curl and at the top you drop your wrists.
Yes.
That's opposite of arm wrestling.
I mean, I've tried to do that in the past. Like, it's always felt a little bit weird for me, but now I would never dream of doing that. And now, like, my wrist never bends back, unless I'm doing like specific kickback extensor, forearm extensor exercises. You know,
everything for a purpose.
Yeah, it's funny. But the one exception to all of this is that when I bench press, my wrists bend back, and it has to be that way because I've never been comfortable with like a real grip. I try not to false grip where like, you know, your thumb's on the other side entirely, but my thumb I use like a bulldog grip, they call it, where you're kind of like squeezing the bar like this. That I can't let go. So it's the one thing I can't let go.
I wasn't expecting that. So I do have a question about that, because when I was learning to bench press and do all that shit when I was like 19 or whatever, my friend who taught me all this shit, who learned all this shit from his father and all this stuff, right? He'd be, we were like 18, 19 years old, and we're like 150 pounds soaking wet, right? And he'd be benching like 285 for reps, no problem. And he'd be like that with the fucking bar sitting in his knuckles. So I just figured, oh, okay, that's how he does it. Yeah. It doesn't matter, right? Yeah. But since then, I've been hearing a lot of people say, keep a straight wrist. It's direct force and all this shit. So how do you feel about all that bullshit with the straight wrist?
So I don't think a straight wrist is possible, really, unless you're using a really light weight. You have to have a little bit of kickback to your wrist when you bench, because the bar is supposed to be sitting over your wrist bones, right? So if your wrist is completely straight and your hand is closed, the bar is in front of your wrist bones. And that is when your fingers can release and you can drop the bar on you, even if you have the thumb around, right? And you'll find a lot of people's wrist starts to shake when they're too straight. So you have to have a little bit of kickback. Now, when you're getting into a powerlifting type grip, and you're using maybe maximum legal width, right? Now your hands it's not just about this. Now you're also out here. So there's a little bit of radial flexion too, and extension in your wrist, right? So now this is like kind of a weird position. So what a lot of people do is they'll tend to bend in like this. And then when you twist the hand in, the bar kind of lines up over the heel of your palm a little bit better. Now, I think if you're a very casual bench presser, just grab the bar how you're comfortable, and how it's safest, a mix between safety and comfort. I think when you do something for a while, you get used to it, right? So I've been using the bulldog grip for a while, and it was something that I kind of just like started doing, and then I realized a lot of powerlifters actually do it that way, and I was like, oh, that makes sense, right? I also use wrist wraps when I bench out, right? For me,
So is that for stability?
yeah, for stability, anytime I've bench pressed like really over 135 almost, which is like my first warm up, but my wrists start hurting, right? So I have to use the wrist wraps, and I also use them when I squat because when the bar's on my back, my wrists want to bend back. And it's just an extra level of support. Like I don't need the extra stress there. It's not beneficial stress. But I will say that, initially my wrist was very used to being bent back, right? So even like if I ever have to flop press it doesn't feel weird on my wrist to do that. Mostly because I'm used to the bar pushing down. Of course, like when you're flopping, you're probably out in your fingertips, which is significantly worse, but my wrist feels okay with it. So
I'm going to have to try that then, because lately for like at least a year, I've been forcing myself to grab the bar with a grip like this. To imagine that the bar is sitting right over my radius and ulna, you know. But maybe
whatever. If you point your kind of middle knuckles up to the ceiling, that's when you kind of get an optimal grip, right? And then from there, it's not straight,
right.
It's
a little kicked back.
This is a little kicked back,
and to me,
if you open your hand, the bar would be right over your wrist bones right here.
Right.
So,
and when you said legal maximum width, right?
Yeah.
So what is that all about?
Just according to powerlifting federations, pretty much all the powerlifting federations, you can't put your hands further out than the rings, the power rings, on a bar, and that's maximum legal grip. So you can go anywhere inside of that, but you can't go further out, which kind of puts people who have a very long wingspan at somewhat of a disadvantage.
Right, because when I bench, those rings are like, I usually put my ring finger on those.
Yeah, and it's weird. Like if I put my ring finger on that, I'd find that feels close to me.
Yeah, so I mean? Like if you go middle finger or index, now imagine if you're a super wide fucker with super long arms, like you want to be further.
Yeah, exactly. Then again, powerlifting is not a sport for the very tall.
Oh, right. How many tall guys are doing that? With long arms, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the upper weight classes, maybe, but generally you won't find tall people excelling in powerlifting.
As a matter
there's
of fact,
exceptions, of course, but yeah.
There's something I never thought about before is like there's a lot of guys out there who have super short arms and they're a little squat and they're like 5'6" or 5'5", and they're just naturally good at benching. Like, I'm not saying they're fucking stellar numbers, but like they could never bench all year, and they'll probably fucking bench 10 reps with a decent amount of weight just because they got short fucking arms.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have short arms, and I don't have a very thick rib cage. So I got the short end of the stick on both ends. So if I'm like completely flat backed, which I mean, I bench with an arch, but if I'm completely flat backed.
Oh yeah. And that's the other thing I was going to say. Those guys don't even bench with an arch.
Exactly.
Because they don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah. But it's so funny. They're the ones, they look at other people benching on Instagram or wherever, and they're like, oh, you powerlifting people, you don't even know how to bench. You can't even bench that weight without an arch, blah, 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 blah. And then we're sitting here and be like, listen, my range of motion is literally twice yours.
Has nothing to
Cut
do
me some
with,
slack.
Yeah. It's like you can't talk about the arch in a negative way if you don't factor in what the point of tight scapula are, right?
Yeah.
Because that's why it's there.
Yes. Yeah. It's about stability.
Yeah.
It's not I mean, some people do use it for range of motion reduction, but you can very clearly see when people are doing it for that and where they're like clearly trying to maximize how high their belly and rib cage is versus me, who is just trying to not rip my shoulders apart.
Well, speaking of bench pressing and arm wrestling.
Yeah.
I just saw this video from this channel I subscribe to, like a powerlifting strength training channel, where they showed you the Eric Spoto bench press.
The Spoto press.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
I had no idea this
exercise.
existed. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I think it's a really good exercise.
How would you describe the Spoto press?
So it's a regular bench press, but you, instead of touching your chest, you stop maybe 1 inch above your chest and then press the bar back up from there. Now, what I think is critical to it is that you have to be really precise and controlled at that spot. You can't just, a lot of people will just not go all the way down.
Right.
And that's not the spotter press, right? The whole point is you're trying to touch, quote unquote, or stop in the same place. You're trying to have control in that area, and you're trying to slow down the bar before it touches your body. Not to reduce the range of motion,
but like to stop for,
but
like
to be comfortable
pause
in that area.
Right.
Yeah, like a pause almost. So that when you do go all the way down and you press, you've got so much time spent in that range of motion that you're comfortable in it.
Right. Because that's the hardest part, is coming out of that.
Yeah, and also there's constant tension, right? You're not touching your chest. Your muscles are always working. Not that I think that when you touch your chest, you should relax or anything. But if you're not touching anything, you're firing the whole way up. So it's difficult from that perspective as well.
Yeah, like I have a weird thing with bench pressing where I hate it when it's a flat bench press.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate it. And the reasoning is because of the length of my arms and whatever the hell else my other measurements are, I have a really hard time being comfortable getting the bar down to my chest. So like when I heard of this spotto press, I'm like, oh, I should do that.
Yeah.
Because then I don't have to go all the way down and I can control it there and come up. The only bench press that I am comfortable doing is a decline bench press. If I was to get rid of the flat, I love the decline because then you're coming down to a different spot. And what is it? Is it your humeral angle is going to be different or whatever it is?
Sure, yeah. Yep.
And then, and I'm not competing or anything. So why the fuck should I do it flat if I don't like it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another thing that I tell people, perhaps have shoulder injuries or have a lot of trouble getting to their chest in a great way is towel. Wrap a towel, roll up a towel or a foam block or something like that. Put it on your chest. I think a spotter press is like a specific exercise, right?
Right.
If you just need to stop before your actual chest,
put something there,
Put something there, so you're touching the same spot all the time, at least, right? You're not stopping an inch higher, an inch lower. Sometimes you touch your chest, sometimes you don't.
Now, is that called a board press, or is
it's called a board press, especially if you come like from the West Side school of thinking. But you don't have to call it anything. It's just a bench press where you stop a little bit shorter, but you're still consistent about it.
Yeah, and they sell like foam blocks that attach that make it easy.
And of course, you can just jerry rig it yourself too. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
cool. Let's move on to another question. Even though I could say something else about the future of arm wrestling, because you made up a really good point that just in the 2 years you saw an incredible evolution already, right? So I was trying to think, well, if I was going to try to answer this question, how the hell would I answer it? Well, so I don't really know where the future of arm wrestling is going, but if I was to like take a little leap right now, I think the future of arm wrestling has to do with, if you look at what people talk about when there's problems with matches, it seems like the number one and number two problem is reffing and strap application. So like the strap takes too fucking long, so now your attention is gone. And then if you don't have running fouls and you stop the fucking match over and over, people are like, oh, come on, what is this, right? That's why people love WAL, because it's a little more lenient, it's a little more showy. They got running fouls. They're not stopping the fucking matches as much as like stricter reffing, I guess you would call it, right? Like WAF and IFA and stuff like that. So besides that, I think the future of arm wrestling, because I think they need to figure that out. Like maybe there's a new style of reffing where not only is it running fouls, but maybe it's beyond running fouls. Like I still think this is a bad idea, but imagine you were trying to figure out how the hell arm wrestling is going to become as big as UFC, because UFC was like this weird underground thing, and somehow it exploded. And maybe it was meant to explode no matter what. But the thing is, people just go crazy over UFC, and it's like a thing. It's overtaken the popularity of boxing, and it's like, whatever, it's big, right? Arm wrestling's not there. But you can kind of imagine, like, how does it get there, right? So I think the problem is, like, what if not only do you do running fouls, but you know how like they say, well, if you got 2 fouls, the other guy fucking wins and that's the end of the match. Like maybe it's not even the end of the match. Like maybe it's like, okay, winner, match goes on, and you're still going, and that guy caught a point.
Yeah.
And you're still going, and then you caught another point, or the other guy caught a point, and maybe the match, maybe they could take super matches, and instead of 6 separate matches, it's one fucking long match, and then the dude who fucking accrues the most points is the winner.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it.
Because I don't think anyone thought of that.
Yeah.
Because it might be a stupid idea, but I'm saying, what if we don't stop the thing so that we fucking enjoy it more, right?
So I was watching the Frodo Haugland and Coach Ray match on Friday. And they were... Engen, who was, one of the greatest arm wrestlers
he was reffing the thing.
Was reffing the thing. And I know from things that he's said before, he's like very in support of strict reffing. And so is Ray to some degree.
Right.
When they're talking about WAF, when they're talking about, the purist, we have to find out who is better.
Right.
Type of thing,
That's
right?
That's right. Because otherwise, if it's not pure... then how do you really rank these guys, right?
Right. Now, I think that are you really finding out who's the better guy when you are sort of losing and you slip your elbow off and then you get a restart and maybe on the restart you get a better position?
A little.
Is that proving that you're the better guy? So I think the rule can be exploited to not benefit what you think the rule is benefiting, right? I mean, that's just one rule, right? But it is annoying also to have, they were in a couple of, I mean, there's many matches where this has happened, but thinking about this most recent one, right? There were many screamers, as Neil Pickup would call them, right? And you want to see somebody win. They're in a deep hook. They're both putting 110% effort in, and then the match stops because there's an elbow foul. And someone's elbow micro jumped, 0.2 millimeters.
And sometimes you don't even see it. And you're like, is that even a
exactly
call?
I don't even know how Engen sees these things. He's like 300 years old.
Right.
But somehow it's seen or whatever. No advantage was gained. Yet there was a restart. And, I think for the most part, Frodo was on the winning side, and he did win pretty convincingly. But he did lose 1 or 2 rounds on fouls. And is it a big deal? No. But if it was really close and he lost on these micro fouls, that would be very disappointing, right? Because I think he was clearly the stronger guy there. So I think that there doesn't have to be this divide between entertainment and purity. I think Neil Pickup's Arm Wars are a really, really great blend. I think the King of the Table event was a really great blend of the two. I think running fouls should be the go-to for everybody, for all leagues. I also think at the same time, there needs to be a clearer definition of what is a foul that one can gain advantage from. And what is a foul that is completely meaningless, right? I think we also need a stricter definition on that. As far as your second point regarding straps, I think that's a complicated issue. You've spoken about the Bob Brown strap.
Yeah, I love the Bob Brown
I don't
strap.
like it.
I think no one likes it because I don't hear anyone talking about it.
It feels like you're tied to someone, but you don't get any of the advantages of a strap. So if you can just kind of yank on somebody's arm, but there's no, the hand still plays a part when you're strapped up, right? Slightly differently though. I feel like in the Bob Brown strap, like you don't really get as much, you're allowed more hand play, but it's almost like not strap-based hand play. It's like what you would normally do in a non-strap match, except your wrists are also tied together. So it's almost like the worst of both worlds, the way it feels for me.
Well, here's the thing, and I agree on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
So the thing for me is you you have to go back to why do we even decide we need a strap? And in my opinion, it's because you're slipping. So if the point of the strap is just to prevent the slip, the Bob Brown strap makes a really good case. However, since we've not been doing the Bob Brown strap, we all got used to the other strap.
Yeah.
And now we like that so much that it's kind of like, well, it's not just that we slip. Now we want that strap applied that way so that we can pull that way so that we can win. So it's like this whole thing. Yeah. So then it comes down to, okay, well, what is the base fundamental reasoning for the strap? And can we say for sure that that's why we want the strap? Let's say if it leans toward Bob Brown strap. Or are we going to say, well, no, we've been doing it that way the most and we like it, so we'll just do it that way, even though that's not the point of the strap. The point of the strap is just so that we don't come apart, right? So I don't know. I think I like both because I already got used to the old strap and I know what it feels like in there. And I don't know if I care yet if I have the buckle or not in the regular strap versus the Bob Brown strap where it probably doesn't even matter who gets the buckle. And the thing about the Bob Brown strap that makes it complicated is if you really hate it because it's so different from the other strap, how it feels or what you're missing from it, I think it's also because the person who fucking applies that goddamn strap has to do it really well. Otherwise, it's going to be garbage.
Yeah.
And you're going to be like, oh. So the other one seems to have, I think, better success rate, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yes, I agree. 100%.
So in other words, between those two straps, I still think the question of how do we make the strap better for spectators, either one doesn't help because it's still the same application. It still takes the same amount of time. It's still like, what's happening up there?
Well, a lot of,
right?
I mean, if we're talking about spectators that aren't into arm wrestling, they don't even know what the strap is for.
Yeah.
They're like, whoa, why are they tying their hands up?
Right.
And you could tell them, oh, it's so the hands don't come apart. Well, it's like, well, why would they come apart? Mm-hmm. Well, because people slip. Well, why do they slip? Well, because when people are top rolling, they don't want to be hanging on to the other person. Well, why would they want to not hang on to the other person? Aren't you trying to win the match? It's like, well, yeah, but if you're hanging on, then they can get into your fingers easier. And if you don't have a stronger hand and can hold on, then you want to slip and to be able to access other strengths. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, why aren't you strong enough to win without a strap? Isn't the point of this to have a stronger hand and arm? And then you're like, you have a point.
But it's a little too complicated for that to even be necessary. Like if you looked at boxing, the only reason why you're not asking why they are or aren't doing things, except for maybe when they fucking seem to hug a lot and they're like, why aren't they fighting? Like, that maybe that's what do they call it? There's got to be like a phrase for that when they're just hugging and resting on each other for too long, and people get upset and they're like, when is it? What's going on? Separate them, get them. Yeah. So the refs often will separate them and say, "Come on, fight, guys!" Right. So that's to me what the strap is. If you're a spectator and you don't really know enough about the sport and you don't care, you just want to watch the thing. When the strap comes in, it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, why is this taking fucking 20 seconds and these guys are standing there and like, why is this happening? Like, I want to delete that opportunity from spectators. And I don't know if there's an answer yet. Like, but what I do want to ask you is what I noticed is I was watching some old match and it wasn't that old. And I forget who it was even, but they got into a strap and it was one of those Velcro straps. And I was like, oh, they don't do that anymore. Yeah. But I think the Velcro strap, when they did it, it was super fast. Sure. It went on there and it fucking Velcroed and they just fucking went for it. And I think I heard somebody say, someone who really knows what the fuck they're talking about, it might have been Travis or somebody, they said the Velcro straps are great, but only when they're new out of the fucking box. And then when the Velcro wears out, they're useless. You got to throw them in the garbage.
Right.
So, I don't think...
You got to come up with some hyper-resistant Velcro. NASA-level technology, just so we can arm wrestle better.
Industrial Velcro. Something.
I mean, unfortunately, I just think that right now, the strap is like part of the meta, and unfortunately, you've got all these people training for strap matches. You know what I mean? If you can't, if you suddenly change the strap significantly, a lot of people are going to be, a lot of the athletes are going to be kind of upset about that.
Like,
you know
look, like you already hate the Bob Brown strap. So imagine if you're like a pro,
right,
at the top 8,
right,
and then they're like, "Oh, we're doing the Bob Brown strap."
Yeah,
everyone's going to say, "Go fuck yourself!" Like, this is terrible.
Right. Now, Gary Roberts had like those no strap tournaments, right? Like one or so.
I don't know. What is that?
Well, it was a tournament where there's just no strap.
So what does that mean? That when they needed a strap, they were power hooking or something?
I'm not 100% clear on what the details were, but there wasn't going to be a strap because he said, I think they start you off in a hook, basically.
So is this recent, though?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he said, it's because it lends itself to better flow of the tournament.
Right.
But I think sacrificing the integrity of the match for the flow of the tournament isn't really good either.
I think it's a bad idea because if I want to pull in the strap position, but there's no strap, I don't want to be in that fucking match because now I got to become powerful hook, and I'm not an inside guy like I want more options. The evolution of the sport is that you have all these options,
right,
including the strap,
right. I mean, if you're a Kings mover and you can't Kings move without a strap, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of people kind of shit on Kings movers, but we want to call it an open top roll, call it an open top, whatever it is, right? Why would you take that away from someone, even if it's not their A move, right? If we're not talking about Michael Todd, right? If we're talking about, Denis Saplankov, you're going to take away a whole defensive option from him?
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a lazy idea for not reinventing the strap so that you could still use it and it solves the problem that you hate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I understand Gary Roberts'
there may be ways of like stitching a strap differently so that you kind of just like I said once, you could just slip it over people's wrists, tighten it up, and bingo bango, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe people want to experiment with that. Personally, I don't mind it right now. I don't mind it at all, even as a spectator, because I arm wrestle and use the strap myself. I know that it's going to be about 20 seconds of application, and you're jostling for a position. So it's like I know that's part of the sport. I
got an idea then. I never thought of this. It is part of the sport. And the more you're into the sport, because you're an arm wrestler, the more you have no problem with that strap.
Yeah.
So
there's so much that goes on while it's being applied too.
So you know what the problem is? I just realized it. It's not that the spectator is supposed to sit there and get bored. The people putting on the event have to make the fucking strap interesting.
Yes.
Get in there with that camera. Talk about how they're getting the strap, how this guy's getting it high or low, and how he likes it.
Yeah.
And how they're jockeying as they're applying.
Yeah.
Because since they're not doing that, they're making it seem like, oh, we got to put the strap on. Okay, close the curtains, like as if you're changing your underwear. Right. And then when you're done, okay, we're ready now. That's what the spectator feels like. So I think that's what it is. Bring the attention in there.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So that's it. We solved it.
Yeah. Done. Next.
All right. So the other question I have for you is, what tips have you learned along the way since you started? Anything specific?
Well, I think Greg talked about this. The tip that Josh gave him about how to set up and like crack your wrist, check your watch, and blah blah blah. So I think when I tried that setup, it was pretty successful. It's a little bit odd to kind of set up that way all the time. So I don't do it that way all the time, every single practice match, because I feel like purposely stressing my hand and arm is good for training. So I'm not going to set up in my most advantageous position all the time.
So what you say is the setup. Describe what it is that's weird about it.
Well, you're cranking your leg up on the leg of the table. You're twisting your torso, so it's a naturally uncomfortable setup. First of all, and second of all, it's like both super defensive and super offensive at the same time. Like, you're kind of curled up, so it leaves little room for your arm to be moved. Like somebody's got to really open you up, right? And then also, because you're so coiled up, you're ready to pull back and go sideways, right? So, I mean, I already know, I came in knowing like what wrist flexion and pronation is and all that, because even before coming to your practices, like I had practiced with some other people here and there, right? So I knew, I wouldn't say I knew how to move per se, but I wasn't like a complete beginner, right? So for me, it was really about like what's going on above the arm or below the arm rather, right? Foot, hips, etc., and how that can contribute to better force expression.
Because usually when you start out, you don't know anything.
Right.
It's
you kind of just grab and you're like,
yeah,
well, why isn't this going anywhere? Right. So luckily I had, watched enough YouTube videos and gotten a chance to practice with people like a couple of years ago and intermittently, where it wasn't completely new to me. But that setup was.
So would you say that setup is like the Jerry Cadorette setup?
Yeah, except he launches forward with his shoulder, and you can also do that setup to kind of go back and sideways if you're trying to do a top roll. But I feel like it's still a pretty side pressure heavy top roll, but because you're basically facing the side, it feels like your tricep is way more involved, almost like you're pressing into it, right? Because you're kind of like this, right? Which apparently a lot of people set up for top rolls anyway, whereas I was set up just like squared off.
Right.
Which, that's another thing too. It's like if you just do this, you're like considered squared off. It's
right.
Like, that's not squared off.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of
everybody knows that's not squared. The refs know that's not squared off, but your shoulders are kind of in the same plane. So
it's like we all agree on a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Not, but that aside, I don't always set up that way, because when I set up like actually square, I know it's my arm and hand that have to do all the work. Right. Right. Of defending or offending. And I'm not trying to pin people all the time. I'm trying to like get a good workout, learn how to arm wrestle better. And I'm trying to work the weak parts of my game. Right. Right. Which big time is my hand. Right. So hand and wrist.
Well, yeah. So like, you ever notice how, when you watch matches from wherever, because, I subscribe to so many channels that post matches, and sometimes they'll just throw something up and I'm like, well, where the hell is this from? Like, okay, let me watch it. Right. You ever notice how like there'll be a match and a guy will win and a guy will lose pretty easily? Where like, yo, that guy fucking lost and he had no chance. Yeah. And that guy won and he wasn't gonna fucking lose, and then you'll rewind that match real quick to check their setup. I do this all the time when like I catch something and I'm like, let me see that again. I always see that type of match is exactly what you just said. One guy is fucking totally turned in and tight, and he's going there already in the setup, and the other guy is just like this. And I'm like, that guy's never going to win. Right. And he doesn't even know it. The match didn't even start yet. And he's like, and you're like, you had never had a chance. Yeah. You know, and everyone knew it. Like the ref knew it. Experienced guys watched it and knew it. And nobody says anything because they're like, watch this. We know how this is going to go.
It's just like setting up for a lift in the gym, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you could tell, if you know how to lift from a mile away, someone's about to deadlift, they got their back rounded over, right. They're like breathing in on the way up, like all sorts of weird shit happening. And you're like, that bar is never going to go up. Right. Right. It's the same thing. And of course, like when you're arm wrestling, you're going against another human being, not a static object, but still setup is important. Mm-hmm. Right. For me, setup was a huge tip, and I'm still trying to get more and more tips on that, because I think there are still big holes in how I'm setting up, because there are times that I feel good and times that I feel terrible against the same person. And I'm like, I know I did things differently, but I don't know enough to know what I did differently. Right. So I'm trying to still break that down and analyze that. A big part of it, I think, is which muscles you're engaging, because everybody says this, arm wrestling is a static and negative strength sport, right? You're not curling someone across the table. You're holding that position and bringing them down, right? Or even letting go of your angle a little bit. So that kind of brings into question, well, where do I put most of my effort, right? Is it the bicep? Is it the forearm, right? Because you also can't load before the setup, right? You're not trying to take everything. Or
I don't know.
In WL, maybe you are. But like for like stricter leagues, you're not trying to do that. Also, if you're just trying to not be a dick and start off fairly, you're not trying to do that, right? So you're not trying to load too much. But at the same time, there's that static load where you're not pulling into their hand, but you're just tightening up, right? So where do you tighten up, right? And add to that the complexity of this instrument we're using, right? All the muscles in the forearms, all the muscles in the hand, right? Your rotator cuff, your pec, like where you get tight, how you're holding the peg. I mean, all of that can play into this setup. So for me, there's still so much uncharted territory for myself. And I think there's some people that are just naturals at it and they're like, they know how to do it. I'm not one of them, as far as I know. So for me, it's, I'm still looking for more and more tips on that. And I think basic one is like height, get height, right? That was a big tip for me. I don't remember exactly where I learned it. It could have been on YouTube, but, radial deviation. That's something that I told my friend Arif. Right, because he was always grabbing me low. I mean, if he was like strong enough to like just, rail me to the side there, but I was like, why don't you just like focus a little bit more on this? And he was like taking my hand, no problem, no problem at all, because he's really strong there, right? Which is good for me because then I've got to get my radial flexion stronger too in order to combat his, right?
Right.
But there's more elements to that. There's way more. There's what are your fingers doing? What all this stuff. So, as far as tips besides that, I think those are the two.
Well, that's a lot.
ones.
I mean, look, setup itself is a huge deal. Like as you were talking, I was thinking about how we're all getting stronger week by week. So that's the cool thing. Like guys like you that come by over a 2-month plus period, like within 2 months, you're going to be way better than you were 2 months ago. That's the beauty of coming to every fucking practice wherever you're going, right? And then as you're getting stronger, if you're practicing with the same guys that you're practicing with are getting stronger. So it may feel like everything's always the same between you, but the difference is just that they're different guys with different strengths, so you know how to handle them as arm wrestlers. So what I think of when you were talking about setup is like when setup is like a game changer is when, let's say you're up against somebody that was always super strong compared to you and they're always getting stronger, but maybe they're getting at the top end of their strength and they're only making micro gains because they're so fucking strong and they've been doing this for years, but you're making bigger jumps because you started from way lower, right? And then maybe one day you grip up with that guy maybe a year or 2 years later, and the difference between you beating that guy and not beating that guy is your setup. So like that's when it's like, that's why setup is important, and for each person, like you said, it's different. Yeah. And it's geared toward your strengths, right? Obviously. And but when you're both just sitting there straight for straight and it's arm for arm, well, that's the ultimate battle, right? Like there's none of that like, how do I cheat my way through this? Because as we all know, cheating is allowed in that sense. You need to find all the cheat ways,
all the advantages,
just short of a foul.
Right.
And that's how, I don't know, I think that's what makes a smart arm wrestler, is like figuring those things out.
Yeah, well, I think a big part of any sport or even strength training in general is skill acquisition, not just the physical aspect of getting stronger. And I think in the beginning stages of any activity or sport or whatever, skill acquisition generally outpaces strength gains, right? Like,
because you can only get so strong.
Exactly, right? You're only going to put on so much muscle
in amount of time.
Right. But if you learn to use that more efficiently, you can make huge changes to your game, right? So for me, a lot of it is skill acquisition right now, right? And I'm still doing my arm wrestling exercises and all of that, which have taken a back seat because the practices are pretty abusive.
They are, right? What I noticed is when I usually do a supplementary training day on a day like tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if I don't, because I'm like, oh, I'm just too tired, then I don't.
Yeah.
And then I skip it. And that's necessary, I noticed.
I mean, I try not to skip too many, but there's times where I just don't have time or something like that. But if I'm feeling sore, I'm okay with doing it. And if I'm feeling like, joint pain,
achy,
then maybe I'll do like a couple sets just to get a little bit of blood flow, but I'm not going to go super hard if it triggers the pain, right? Because I need that pain to go away by next week, right?
Right.
Luckily, I haven't had anything too terrible in terms of pain, but I feel like every time I get like sore in different places too. Like I typically get sore in my wrists, right? But it's like different places in my wrists. And then this week I was sore in my forearms, which I'm usually not, even though I can feel them working.
You think it's because you went up against different people?
I think that's part of it. And I also think going back to the setup and skill acquisition thing, I was doing different things in practice. So last practice, I was really trying to work on stopping people just with rise, pretty much rise and back pressure, right? And I have that like weird wrist pain when I try to cup sometimes, and people are in my fingers. So that's also part of the reason why I was avoiding that, because I didn't want that pain.
Right.
But all of that like made this kind of like front quarter of my forearm really blow up, right? And I think it's totally fine to work on different things in different practices, right? I don't have to hit every single part of my arsenal every single practice, right? So that's another thing too, and I think that's sort of like a tip that I both stumbled upon and have heard a lot. I think Coach Ray mentioned that pretty recently, and Froda as well. Not to just talk about them, but in their interviews with Devin, they were saying how they both like work on different things during different practices, and I was like, oh, I'm starting to get why you do that. Because you can't work on everything, and if you do, like, are you focusing on any one area enough to actually get better, right?
Yeah, I'm starting to realize that as I get better at things and I'm like, oh, cool, this is working for the last 3 to 4 months or whatever it is, that's when it's a good time to say, well, what am I not doing? And stop doing that, because you already did so well. What's the thing that you haven't been doing? So a perfect example is I haven't had the time, so I should probably start doing this next, is start training ulnar flexion, which is the opposite of the height thing, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose of that would be your hook, basically.
Yeah.
Because when you're going into a hook, you're using that with your cup.
Do you watch Arm Wrestling Secrets on YouTube? Yeah. I used to watch. He talked about that recently.
Recently, right?
Yeah.
That's probably why I'm talking about it. Because the way he explained it, I was like, oh, that's a really good explanation.
Yeah, and I never thought about it that way until I watched that video either. I remember like Ryan Bowen was like using like some car spring or something like that to train ulnar flexion, but he was saying it as some form of like containment in the strap. And maybe I'm not at that
like
level.
Like a low hand top roll. Or
yeah,
but
right? It's not something I really do now.
Right.
So I think for that it's a little bit lost on me. But when the guy talked about it, I think his name is Tim.
Yeah.
When he talked about it in terms of the hook, and I was like, oh, because it's like it is. I always thought of it as pronation. That's the thing, and
right, because you're
turning over.
Right.
But I've always been like, yeah, but it doesn't really feel like pronation. It kind of sort of feels like pronation, but when I do this movement, like I feel it more in the bottom, not really in the pronator. So I see what he's thinking about now, and I think it's a bit like when I hook. Like for me, it's a big part of like turning the other person over, right? Thinking of that, but I never made that connection of like calling it ulnar flexion Because I think when you realize what it's called to some degree and you already know how to train ulnar flexion, you have a better mind-muscle connection both in your training and on the table.
Mm-hmm. You know what else they call it? Some guys like Paul Lynn, they call that sinking.
Ah, yeah, okay.
So what Paul Lynn would do is he would take a super long fucking sledgehammer and he'd be pointing that way.
Yeah.
And he'll be lifting it that way.
Yeah.
And I never understood that, like, oh, well, that's why you want to do it. And the other interesting thing about why you would want to do that is, let's see. So if you're in a hook, you're doing that. But there's one more major thing that I totally forgot where you need that. Oh, so when you're in a hook, it's not just when you're, let's say, imagining that you're using that in a winning position always, but also when your hook gets turned over. And then, let's say you're John Brzenk, he loves to get turned over and bleed guys out because he knows he can come back because his fucking ulnar flexion is so strong.
Yeah.
So that's another subtler reason why you need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it's good for training the lower two fingers, the pinky and the ring, because whenever you're doing this, you're disproportionately putting more effort into these two fingers. Mm-hmm. So it's a good way, and these tend to be weaker fingers for most people.
Absolutely.
So it's a good way to both train that lower part of your forearm and at the same time your ring and pinky. Mm-hmm. So if you're grabbing a sledgehammer, for example, or I don't know, a broomstick, whatever it is, you're going to be putting pressure through those fingers. So it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like even if you're doing like you could kind of maybe approximate it even in the supinated version for a multi-spinner. Because it's pulling into these fingers and you're having to keep supination stability when you cup. So there's a little bit of that involved as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to get back to a multi-spinner.
I just started working with one, actually. I'm just pathetically weak at it.
So what size did you get?
I got like the baby size. I got like 2 3/8 inches or something like that.
Okay, that's a good size though, because that's like a comfortable cupping.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I figure if I want it thicker, then I can just add layers of whatever on it. But you can't make a bigger one smaller. So, and I started off with a really big one, and I gave it to my friend the Reef because his hands are much bigger, and I realized that there was no way that I could like hold on to that thing. It was like I would be like this,
right?
You know.
Yeah,
which
I kind of
maybe is useful, but at the same time, I feel like if I just train for holding enormous people's hands, then I'm always training somewhat inefficiently. You know, I feel like there are times where you might want to train with a more open grip, and times where you want to train with a more closed grip and kind of get tighter. And
yeah, I feel like the bigger one is going to attack your fingers a little bit, but only all the way out there,
right?
But then the smaller one is actually like a grip training where you get your overall grip strength on your fingers and everything.
Yeah. And I think it's not, I mean, a lot of people say it attacks the fingers a lot. It does. I feel it a lot in my forearm too, though. So, which is perfect for me because I don't want to just feel it in my fingers.
Yeah.
You know
no,
I mean?
I wouldn't say that it's like it really kills your fingers in any way.
Yeah.
Like when I did multi-spinner, I did it early on, because that was like the only thing I had. And I would do, and I was training from zero. So I was like, well, let me see how much I'll improve every week. So I would try to add like 5 pounds to the lift every week or whatever. And I got to my max eventually. And it didn't make my fingers any stronger. It destroyed my arms though, because you're pulling and staying tight. And it's the multi-spinner. To me, the point of the multi-spinner is it's this weird handle, but if there's nobody there with you, it approximates an opponent.
The multiple pressures you would feel. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I do a lot of it at home too, so it's a lot of times I'm like distracted or or whatever. So it's easy for me to kind of lose track, but and of course, I don't have like the ideal setup at home for a multi-spinner. I've got like a pulley system on a pull-up bar, so I'm always pulling downwards instead of kind of straight across, which I would like. I could bring it to the gym, but
Right. Yeah, no, I would like actually one of those pulley systems where you can adjust the height every 4 or 6 inches or whatever.
I'm not sure why they don't make every single one of them like that, but I'm surprised with your gym you don't have that already.
Yeah, like it's weird. I got the arm bet pulley, which is right in front of you.
Yeah.
And then I got another pulley where there's one way up on the bottom and one all the way on the bottom, one on the bottom, one on top.
Yeah.
But I don't have an adjustable one. So believe it or not, every now and then that thing comes up in like my Amazon feed where it's like things you might be interested in. And I'm like, yeah, I am interested in that. And I'm like,
not exactly enough to buy it, but
right,
I'm interested.
I was like, do I really need another giant device to like screw to the wall? So like, no, I'm fine. You know, I got so many things I need to train. It's like, forget about it.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I got anything else to ask you here. I don't know. I think we've covered enough. I mean, it's been an hour.
Yeah.
So anything else you like to add that you forgot maybe, or you were thinking about?
I mean, I think one of the topics is carryover from other movements and jobs and all that.
Oh yeah, right. So prior experience before arm wrestling, does it carry over?
I think yes, depending on what you do. I think if you're a regular gym goer, certainly, right? One thing that I see is people who are rather new and like me, but they don't work out, right? So they may even sometimes have a bigger hand or a bigger forearm, whatever, but they still lose because maybe they're starting to learn how to use their hand and all of that, but they don't have strength like in their shoulder and chest, right? And if you learn how to exploit that in another person, how to take the hand out of it, then it becomes a battle of like, if I'm trying to pin
That's
somebody,
a good point, because there was a guy that was here in the winter who had a really strong hand and wrist, just because, he goes to the gym a little bit, but he doesn't really train for massive shoulders and chest. And that's how you would attack that area. Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to attack that area, I think. But if you get in a kind of a deep hook with someone and you kind of make it a little more side pressure based, then unless they got a super, super resilient elbow, which they probably wouldn't if they're not conditioned to arm wrestle, then I think it's easier to open them up. But I would say I would recommend anyone who's like getting into arm wrestling, go to the gym and train your legs a little bit because it makes you a more well-rounded athlete, number one. Number two, it's good for your metabolism. It's good for your overall like hormonal profile and all that. It's good for health in general, core strength.
That's probably the best argument for training legs.
Yeah. And listen, if you're a pro arm wrestler, obviously I don't expect them to take my advice. They know what they're doing. Right? If you're a pro arm
and there's
wrestler,
guys out there with no legs.
Exactly.
And, not
and you're a weight class athlete and whatever, fine.
Yeah.
But if you're a novice, go to the gym, get a little stronger in your back, right? Learn how to row, learn how to use your lats, learn how to use your rhomboids, all of that stuff. You were talking about last time how you used to get sore like all the way in your traps.
I still do.
Right.
All
from
over
arm
my
wrestling.
whole upper back and everything.
Right. So you know how to engage those muscles already, right? There's people who are out there that like their back pressure is like nothing because they don't know how to do this or they don't have any strength to do this, right? So I think there's carryover from going to the gym. Is there direct carryover to your hand? No. But any strength sport is going to have carryover to something, right? So even the mental like fortitude of like lifting weights and getting close to failure and lifting something heavy and all of that carries over because that discipline is also useful in arm wrestling, right?
Yeah.
So that is what I wanted to add. I think there is carryover in many, many areas, even if it's not direct to hand based.
Yeah, and because everyone's built different, like everyone kind of responds differently to the gym.
Yeah.
And because, you might have a better response in areas that carry over better, you seem more gifted at the table. That's what I've seen in people. You know what I mean? Like there are people who never arm wrestle, but they go to the gym and they're just super strong. So everyone's different. Like I've been weightlifting for decades on and off, and I get to the arm wrestling table, and it's just like, oh, well, that was useless, you know? So like now I have to start training. Yeah. So the one thing I noticed as far as carryover is I totally agree that everything you do in the gym, all that experience prior to arm wrestling, if you never arm wrestled before, it's all relevant. The only difference for me specifically, and it might apply to a lot of other people, is let's take, for example, the row. So what I do with a row, if I'm doing a supine row, right?
Yeah.
So I got the underhand grip. I think of that as like an arm wrestling type thing, because if I'm doing overhand rows, I'm thinking that's not going to carry so much into arm wrestling. So a lot of times I'll do it this way, right? Just for arm wrestling. Mm-hmm. And then because I'm doing arm wrestling, sometimes I'll also row it like that, right? What I noticed is when you're rowing with a barbell, the only difference in terms of training for arm wrestling is when you're arm wrestling, the kind of rowing that you would be doing is it would be super close. So it would be as if you'd have to grab the bar in the middle, and it's like you're pulling it in like this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a lot different, but at least you're still rowing, you're still pulling, you're using your
still
back
your
muscles.
Back. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the only difference. So like I'm still going to do that for strength, but then I'll know that now I got to do this with a super weird fucking thing.
And as long as you can make that distinction, you can still do both.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to switch all your rowing to look like arm wrestling rowing.
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's the thing, you know, it's if you're better at training in general, even in the gym, then you have a better mindset for training for arm wrestling, because you know about volume, sets, reps, fatigue, etc. So when you do your arm wrestling, when you do your arm wrestling lifts, you can treat them the same way you would treat your in-gym lifting. Whereas if you get a complete noob, they've never lifted, now you're telling them, they're like, oh, I did 17 sets of pronation, 1 of supination, and like I did like 3 reps of wrist curls. And you're like, have you ever done a program before? Like, do you know how to, right? They're like, and I did that 5 times a day for 2 weeks, you know? So it's that regimen as well, right?
Well, and then to simplify it for people who are like, oh, Jesus Christ, that sounds so complex.
Yeah.
Just from doing table time once a week and nothing else for months, I got to tell you, the amount of development in the wrist and the forearm and even in the deltoids is incredible. Whereas, like, in order to get that same development, you kind of can't get the same development in the gym. And then it also doesn't look like gym development, because when you go to the gym and you do things, you know, you look more, it's more aesthetic. You're round and bulbous and all this stuff. If you're doing just the arm wrestling thing, you see just the arm wrestling stuff developing, and maybe it's not so aesthetic. So it's a little bit like powerlifting, where you look at a powerlifter and you're like, that guy can deadlift 800 pounds.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't even have delts. Right. Or some weird thing like that.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, the top level pros that aren't like necessarily all juiced up or whatever, or maybe like only slightly juiced up.
Right.
It's all small muscles that have to get bigger for arm wrestling. You know, it's like pronator and you know, your forearm muscles are like relatively big, but nothing compared to like your pecs, right? So they're like big in all the weird areas. You know, so it's very funny looking physiques.
Yeah, well, we were just talking about wrists the other day.
Yeah.
So we've got like a floppy tape measure over here. So I measured my wrists. My wrists are 7 inches.
Yeah.
And what's funny though is in the last 8 months, when I look at my wrists when they're swollen, like a day or two after the, like, I could tell that they're bigger.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Me
wow,
too.
they're getting bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. No, it's good. And the age old thing is that, oh, you can't make your wrists bigger, right? Because it's all connective tissue, which is true for the most part. But, you know, depending on where your attachments are, a lot of the forearm muscles, you know, they can kind of like
that's
get
what it is.
Pretty close,
they
right?
Get
the edge
up in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
you look at Michael Todd's wrists, you know, they're way bigger now than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And
people, Ryan Bowen's too.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ryan Bowen, like he's a weird example if you haven't met him, and I haven't met him, and I only see these videos of him, and I've seen the videos that are like 7 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and like you can't really tell what's really going on with him, but like the dude is like over 100 kilograms, you know?
Yeah.
He just looks like straight and flat, and he's supposed to be super strong. But then he talks about his hands and his wrists, and like if you really put it together, you're like, oh, his wrists are really big. His hand is like almost as big as John Brzezink's hand in some way.
Yeah.
You know, not that he has a Brzink hand, but you know, he's got these big monkey forearms, and they may not be
only the right arm.
Only the right arm. Yeah. So yeah, it's like these things you can't really tell just from people's videos and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was telling Deborah the other day, I was watching this old school match of like Alan Fisher and this other guy, and it was like, I forget what it was.
Dude,
it was
Alan
like
Fisher's crazy,
right? So like he just looks like a regular guy, and then this other dude looked like a regular guy, and these are both pro arm wrestlers. And John Brzink was there, and it might have been like around 2002 or something like that, and I forget what it was. It was I think it was ESPN. It was from Gary's channel or some shit, right? And it was like Gary's footage of this ESPN thing. So it was like sort of a big production on the stage. So anyway, Alan Fisher is up there. And they just look like regular guys. Alan Fisher is like wearing like a polo and jeans. The other guy's like regular looking dude. I forget that guy's name. But you never really see him around anymore. And they just look like regular dudes. And they get up on the arm wrestling table, and they always just look like regular, unimpressive dudes. But then if you just stop for a second and you just look at their hands and their arms, and then you like study the size and the proportions of it, and then quickly compare it to their body, you're like, oh my God, that looks so weird. Their hands and arms are enormous and freaky looking. That's why they're arm wrestling. So like it's hard to tell these things. And a lot of times you're just like, I don't know, like what's the big deal? Unless it's like some big Larry Wheels looking bulbous muscle guy. Then you're like, oh, I got to see this. But then it turns out, oh, that guy can't win against that guy. So it's kind of like, it's weird.
It's funny. I would bet most like amateur arm wrestlers would not be able to beat Larry Wheels on Larry Wheels' day one arm wrestling. Like, if you're a bodybuilder and you've just a few times done biceps and forearms, you're probably going to be a little bit strong, right? Maybe you don't have the technique, but Larry Wheels could muscle you down. You know, a lot of people think like, oh, well, since Devin beat Larry, he's pretty weak. Since like, you know, all these arm wrestlers beat Larry, oh, he's like really weak at arm wrestling. But I bet you normal Joe Schmoes like got into arm wrestling, they wouldn't, even 6 months in or 8 months in or whatever, they would not be able to beat Larry Wheels. There's something to be said about like the arm development of bodybuilders. And they don't have the technique, but I've encountered some of them, not like big guys like Larry, just guys that are into bodybuilding that train their forearms, you know, and train stuff that powerlifters don't care about, like calves and forearms and delts, right?
Yeah,
but they train those muscles, and they have to look good, right? So they train the extensors, they train the flexors, right? Maybe they don't do pronation or anything like that, but they'll do wrist curls, right? Yeah. And they'll do tons of bicep curls, right?
Yeah.
And they're hanging on to heavy dumbbells.
Right.
Right? So they will have strong wrists in some ways and strong arms. So,
well, that was the only thing I was going to say, that I bet you the only thing that Larry Wheels is weak at on day one is pronation.
Yeah, I think everything else finger strength as well, I think. Yeah. But yeah.
And you know, pronation is like, I mean, it is or it isn't, and then it is and then it isn't, depending upon who you're going against, you know?
Yeah.
So like even after like 2 years of training or whatever, for Larry Wheels, let's say like now, you could say he's had about 2 years of training. I don't know how consistently, but let's just say he's had his 2 years of training and he's getting into it, whatever. Still super fucking strong guy, right?
Yeah.
Doing all kinds of shit against like pro guys. His pronation is not there.
Yeah.
So, but then, like you said, he'll wipe the floor with anybody else.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a really interesting thing. Yeah. So we figured out how to make the strap interesting.
Yep.
So we fixed that. So I hope people are listening.
Right. It's hard to patent that idea, but
Yeah, well, you know what it is? It's about production.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the evolution of arm wrestling is going to be. It's about production of camera work and the style of production, because that's how television and entertainment evolves. It's through production. So like if you look at shows from the 70s on television, like Welcome Back Kotter and All in the Family, you're like, I ain't watching this shit. Look how shitty it looks. It's just a production. The shows themselves,
the writing don't
change. You know? Yeah. So that's where arm wrestling is going to change. Yeah. And I think the attention to the strap is going to be part of it. It's going to be camera work. It's going to be how you're talking. Definitely get the right guy on the mic and stuff like that. Don't get like idiots on there. And then the other thing I was going to say is about the future of arm wrestling is technology. So like, I think it'd be great if we had like a new jump in technology where we can scan guys in their bones and their tendons, and we can see where their attachments are, and we could be like, wow, look at how great this guy's tendons are for arm wrestling. And now we can see whether or not he's even going to break his arm or not. Because that's another thing people talk about with Froda is like, how does he not break his fucking arm, right? Well, I mean, if you could scan his arm, maybe you can see where his tendons attach, and maybe you can compare that with other guys, and you can be like, oh yeah, that's why he's gifted in how his body just came together.
I don't need any more discouragement.
But I was thinking how Froda is like Michael Todd.
Yeah,
Michael Todd would always get in this weird position.
Oh my God, it's such ugly
painful,
positions.
right? You'd be like, oh. And the one time he busted his elbow with that guy.
But that wasn't why. That was how he busted his elbow. Yeah, but that's right.
Yeah,
everybody thinks that he broke his right elbow, and that's why it doesn't bend anymore.
Oh,
but it was his left.
Yeah, it was his left.
Yeah, with Wagner.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that was an interesting match. Right?
Yeah, and
that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, but they do the same thing, the same kind of stats for like you said, UFC fighters and all of that. They've got that slow-mo, they've got this, they've got that. The production value is super, super high for UFC. But I think maybe a good path for that for arm wrestling is putting it next to these types of events, next to UFC, next to World's Strongest Man. That way, people, while the things are starting off for World's Strongest Man, can watch an arm wrestling event, a super match or something like that, right? And then see that, hey, it is a structured sport. It's not just two idiots in a bar, right? And it's cool that strongmen and whatnot appreciate the sport.
Right.
They appreciate the strengths. And
how amazing would it be if they made it part of strongman?
I think we'd see a lot more injuries. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you put more lights and more cameras on it that way, it'll evolve quicker. Yeah. That's what the problem is.
At the same time, I don't think we need more theatrics.
No.
We don't need intros. We don't need, we need
all sensationalism, but not fucking like...
Not WWE style.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the WAF thing, the WAL thing is a little bit like that, where like I feel like it shouldn't get any worse than that. Like that's as far as it should go.
Right.
And,
I agree.
And they can even figure out how to bring it back a little bit, because the problem is that a lot of our arm wrestlers, their personalities are kind of like, they're trying to be a little too whatever, and they're kind of corny, and it's like, you know what, maybe we need to find the guys with the right personalities too and work it out. And I don't know, it'll work itself out because it just needs the cameras and the lights on it and the right people. So yeah, awesome. So thank you for being here for
My
All
pleasure.
Things Arm Wrestling.
All Things Arm Wrestling.